Let's take a look at the cosmological argument first. That's the argument we're going to talk about tonight. And many say this is the argument that points to the Big Bang.
You're going, Frank, you know we're in a church here. We're Christians. We don't believe in the Big Bang.
You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? No. I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. You see, the evidence for the Big Bang is quite good. That the universe and time itself had a beginning at some point in the distant past. In fact, it's so good, we even have atheistic scientists admitting it. Stephen Hawking said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. For those of you who don't know, Stephen Hawking is probably the world's most well-known physicist. And he's a modern medical miracle because about 40 years ago, he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, which normally kills people in about a year or two. He's still alive today. He can only speak through a synthesizer. He can barely move his eyelids. But he's one of the most brilliant minds in physics. He's not a believer, but he admits this. Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist, put it this way. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. He's saying there has to be a beginning. And he's a believer in what many call the multi-universe theory, that we're not the only universe out there, that there are many universes. There's no evidence for this, but he believes it. Yet even Vilenkin says even if there is a multiverse, there are many universes outside of this one other than ours, there has to be an absolute beginning to the whole show. There's an absolute beginning, there has to be an absolute beginner. Now, what's the evidence that this universe had a beginning? I'm going to give you an acronym, and this is all from chapter 3 of the book. The acronym is SURGE, S-U-R-G-E, and each one of these letters stand for a different line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. And we'll just list them here and then go through them very briefly. S stands for the Second Law of Thermodynamics. We'll explain that in a minute. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. The R stands for the Radiation Afterglow. The G stands for the Great Galaxy Seeds, and E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. As I mentioned, we're going to go through each one of these in order. I just want to lay it out before we go. SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. This will help you remember it, okay? Let's start with the first, the Second Law of Thermodynamics. It says the universe is running down. It's running out of usable energy. As time goes on, the amount of energy in the universe is decreasing. All scientists know that one day that sun up there is going to burn out. There's only so many hydrogen atoms in it. Now, 2 weeks ago, it was so cold here, I thought it did burn out. I don't know if you remember that. But no, it's still burning up there. Now, you say, well, how does this show the universe had a beginning? That because the sun's going to burn out, how does that show the universe had a beginning? Well, let's look at it this way. Suppose I took a flashlight, and I turned a flashlight on and put it on this little table right here, and tomorrow we were to come back in the room. We left it turned on overnight. What would be the strength of the beam coming out of the flashlight tomorrow? It'd be very weak, if not dead. Why? Because there's only so much juice in those batteries, right? Well, you can think of the universe as having batteries. And if we turned on the universe an infinitely long time ago, would we have any juice in the universe right now? Just like if we turned on the flashlight an infinitely long time ago, would there be any light coming out of there right now? No. So if there is still light coming from the sun, then it must have been created a finite amount of time ago. Because if it had been turned on an infinitely long time ago, we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't have any sun. This shows the universe had a beginning. If it had a beginning, it had a beginner. Second law of thermodynamics is also the law of disorder. Things go to disorder rather than order. Things don't tend to get more ordered as time goes on. They get less ordered. As I'm standing on the stage right here, I'm looking down, and I can see that there are cut marks in the paint. There's scratches in the paint. Why? Second law of thermodynamics. We wear things out. It's why you got to replace this carpet. It's why you have to paint these walls. It's why you got to put gas in your car. Second law of thermodynamics even affects us personally. When we get older, the second law of thermodynamics affects us. It gives us dresser disease. That's when our chest falls into our drawers. It'll happen. Watch out. Not now, but later. Now, if the second law of thermodynamics, some of you will never get that one. Don't give me that groans over there, okay? If Christianity is true, Paul says, Romans chapter 8, the creation is in bondage to decay. But when the new heavens and new earth comes, as it says in the end of Revelation, The second law of thermodynamics is going to be put out of business. We're never going to run down. We're going to be eternal. But right now, the second law of thermodynamics is showing this universe had a beginning. Now, the U in surge stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Does anyone know who this guy is right here? He has a telescope named after him right now. That's Edwin Hubble. Back in the 1930s, they thought it was cool to have your picture taken with a pipe. Okay? Hubble's telescope, as you know, is now circling our planet, giving us tremendous pictures. But back in 1929, Hubble was looking through the telescope at the Mount Wilson Observatory, this 100-inch telescope, which is in Pasadena, California, high up in the hills. And Hubble was looking out this telescope, and he noticed when he looked at the galaxies out there that they were all moving away from us. How did he know this? Because there was a redshift in the light coming from the light. And that redshift told him that the galaxies were racing away from us. If the galaxies looked blue, they'd be coming to us, but they were all moving away. So Hubble deduced, if we could watch the universe in reverse, in other words, we could watch time in reverse, we could reverse time and see everything come in reverse, we would see all those galaxies, all those stars collapse back to a point, not the size of a basketball, not the size of a pinhead, but mathematically it would collapse back ultimately to nothing. So once there was nothing, and then bang, the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. That has implications we'll talk about in a minute. Hold on to Hubble, we're going to come back to him. Good scientific theories predict future discoveries, and scientists thought if the universe did explode into being out of nothing, and it did so in a great explosion, there should be remnant heat from the explosion still out there. Then two scientists working at Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey, discovered it by accident. These two guys right here. These guys, their names, Penzias and Wilson. Right here, that's Robert Wilson on the left, and that's Arno Penzias on the right. They discovered the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion by accident, by means of that antenna right behind them. They won Nobel Prizes for this discovery in 1978. That's a picture of it. You say, what is the background radiation? You ever watching TV at night with the lights out? What do you see when you turn off the TV? You see a glow coming off the TV, right? That's radiation afterglow. That's remnant heat coming off the TV. Well, there's remnant heat coming off the universe. It's still out there. The universe is still cooling off. This heat is just a couple of degrees above absolute zero, but these guys discovered it. When this discovery was made, even an agnostic astronomer, a guy who didn't know if there's a God or not, his name is Robert Jastrow, who sat in the chair Edwin Hubble sat in at the Mount Wilson Observatory until recently. Jastrow said this, when they discovered this radiation afterglow, he said, those who believe that the universe is eternal can no longer believe in that theory. This put the nail in the coffin of what was at that point called the steady state theory, that the universe was static and eternal. If it's static and eternal, it doesn't need a cause. Jastrow said this discovery put that theory to bed. You know what? They weren't done yet. They said, you know what? If this Big Bang cosmology is true, this story of how the universe came into existence out of nothing's true in a great explosion, there should be very fine temperature variations in that radiation afterglow. But they couldn't measure these temperature variations from Earth because there's too much atmospheric interference. So they were going to have to put a satellite up. And in the 80s, they designed a satellite, and they were going to put it up on the space shuttle. But in 1986, the Challenger space shuttle exploded off the launching pad. And the space shuttle program was canceled for a while, so they had no way to get the satellite up. So they redesigned the entire satellite. They made it half its original size. And then they launched it up on a French Titan rocket and put it into orbit in 1989. For 3 years, this satellite circled the Earth taking measurements of the radiation afterglow. They had to wait 3 years to announce their findings because the temperature variations were very, very fine. They had to make sure that they weren't measuring something that was other than these temperature variations. For 3 years, they took readings, and then finally in 1992, they announced their results. What they found shocked the scientific world. In fact, the leader of the expedition, this man right here, George Smoot, said, we found the machining marks of the Creator. They found temperature variations that were down to 1 part in 100,000. In fact, this guy right here said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. That was the headline in Time magazine, May 1992. If you're religious, it's like looking at God. Stephen Hawking, the great physicist I mentioned earlier, said, this is the scientific discovery of the century, if not all time. And these temperature variations, according to the theory, allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe so we could be here. Now, you know, a lot of people, when you go to school, they want to talk about Darwinism, as if Darwinism puts God out of business. Even if Darwinism were true, and I don't think it is. In fact, I think there's many problems with the Darwinistic theory from the goo to you via the zoo. I don't think that's true. But even if it were 100% true, you don't just need a designer to start life. You need a designer at the very beginning of the universe. That if you were to change these temperature variations by an imperceptible amount, we wouldn't even be here. In other words, the universe is designed from the very beginning. The Big Bang was not a chaotic explosion where junk goes everywhere. No, it was a very fine-tuned, precise, shepherded creation. So even if Darwinism is true, you still need a designer. The E in surge stands for Einstein. And Einstein's theory of general relativity, which he knew back in 1917, says that space, time, and matter are correlative, that you can't have one without the other, that space, time, and matter came into existence together. Once there was no space, once there was no time, once there was no matter, and then bang, it all leapt into existence out of absolutely nothing. What's nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. No thing, no matter, no space, no time. Nothing spatial, physical, or temporal. In fact, Einstein didn't like this when he first discovered it. You know what he did? He put a cosmological constant into his equations. What's a cosmological constant? It's a fudge factor into his general relativity equations to make the equation turn out so the universe is static and eternal rather than having a beginning and expanding. And he did this in 1917. Well, some other mathematicians in the 1920s were looking at Einstein's equations going, Al, you seem to have an algebraic error in here. You know what the great Einstein did in order to avoid an absolute beginning to the universe? The great Einstein divided by 0. Now, what are you told in 3rd grade? Never divide by 0. You can go straight to hell for dividing by 0. Don't divide by 0. You know, Einstein did that. You know why? Because he didn't like where his equations were leading. Where were they leading? To God. He didn't like that. Then in 1929, Hubble discovered the expanding universe. And he called Einstein up and he said, Al, you remember what you calculated in your general relativity equations back in 1917? I am observing what you calculated mathematically. Why don't you come out to Mount Wilson and you can look through my telescope and see the expanding universe for yourself? So in 1931, Einstein went out to Mount Wilson and he looked through Hubble's telescope. In fact, who's that right behind him? That's Hubble. See the pipe? Einstein saw the redshift in the light. He got off the telescope, and at some point later, he said the cosmological constant was the greatest mistake in my professional life. The universe did have a beginning. He said, all I'm interested now is finding the mind of God. The rest are details. Now, Einstein was not a Christian. Einstein denied being an atheist. He also denied being a pantheist. So nobody really knows what Einstein personally believed, but his equation showed that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial beginning or beginner to this universe. In fact, this theory has been shown so accurate to more than 5 decimal points that it's virtually certain that he's right. In fact, if Einstein were here today and you were to say, Al, I don't think the universe had a beginning, you know what he'd probably do? He'd probably do this, because it did. Now, this theory has been proven so accurate, and all this evidence is proven so accurate, that this guy, Robert Jastrow, the guy I mentioned earlier, who was an agnostic, didn't know if there was a God or not, wrote a book. And the book went through some of this surge evidence. The book's called God and the Astronomers. And Jastrow sat in the same chair Edwin Hubble sat in when Hubble made his discovery. The chair is the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California. And he sat there until he died 2 years ago. Probably 2 years ago, this month it was. The guy died at 82 years old. So he was a scientist of impeccable credentials. And here's what he wrote in his book after going through some of the surge evidence. He said, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. Here's the guy who's saying he doesn't know if there's a God, but he's saying that the story told in the first chapter of Genesis is consistent with what we're seeing scientifically. Then he went on in an interview to say this, and oh, by the way, that's an actual picture of Saturn from the Hubble Space Telescope. That's Saturn in infrared. Here's what Jastrow later said. He said, astronomers now found they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth, and they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone else would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Wait. Why would a guy who say he doesn't know if there's a God say it's scientifically proven that supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Because there was no nature. Nature itself was created. That's the point. There was no space, matter, or time. There was only what rocks dream about. So if there was no space, matter, or time, the cause must be outside of space, matter, and time, right? The cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. When you think of a spaceless, timeless, immaterial being, who do you think of? God. Especially when you consider he created out of nothing. That's power. He's powerful as well. Every one of these guys I'm about to list here are all Nobel Prize winners in physics. Okay? They helped discover the surge evidence. The first guy is Arno Penzias, who helped discover the radiation afterglow. He said this. The best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. His colleague, Robert Wilson, said this, certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. George Smoot, the guy who discovered the great galaxy seeds, who said if you're religious, it's like looking at God, said this. He said, there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. Now, if all this is true, if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing, that's the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, which view is more reasonable? No one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing. I was at Texas A&M last year, and during the Q&A, an atheist stood up and said, oh, I think number 1 is more reasonable. I said, number 1? I said, let's look at number 2 for just a second. Number 2 says, someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you have a miracle worker. You've got someone. You've got someone creating something out of nothing. Number 1 is a miracle with no miracle worker. You've got no one. How is that reasonable? That doesn't make any sense. I said, you're denying the law of causality. What's the law of causality? That every effect has a cause. It doesn't say everything has a cause. There's got to be something that's eternal. There's got to be an uncaused first cause out there. Either the uncaused first cause is the universe or something outside the universe. All the evidence points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. Therefore, the uncaused first cause must be outside the universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. I said to the atheist that night, I said, the law of causality is the foundation of all science. If you want to give up on the law of causality, you've got to give up on science. Why? What do scientists do? They search for causes. What particular cause caused this particular effect? If you want to give up on the law of causality and say that the ultimate effect didn't have a cause, you might as well just give up on all science, because the ultimate effect is the universe. Where'd it come from? I said, to show you how seriously, everybody in this room takes the law of causality. There is nobody sitting here right now that as you sit here, you are currently worried that a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing in your dorm room and is currently defecating on the carpet. Right? You don't worry about that. You don't worry about it. You don't worry about that as we sit here, right? You're not worried that a raging Bengal tiger is going to appear right here out of nothing and start devouring people. You don't worry about that. Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing without a cause. Now, which view is more reasonable? No one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing? Which view? Someone, right? Now, you can ask who made the someone. We'll get to that. But certainly, someone is a better explanation than no one, because no one can't create nothing out of nothing, because there's nothing. You got to have something to create something, right? Unless you're God, you can create out of nothing. But no one can't create something out of nothing. Only someone can create something out of nothing. You with me on this? In fact, here's an evidence. You're not. Oh, it's nothing. All right, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Or you can ask it this way. If there is no God, why does anything exist? If they say, well, the universe has always been here, so it doesn't need a cause. You say, no, the universe has not always been here. Surge, second law, universe expanding, radiation afterglow, great galaxy seeds, Einstein. Can we say that together? Surge, surge, surge. Say it. 1, 2, 3, surge. Second law, universe expanding, radiation afterglow, great galaxy seeds, Einstein. You got it. You're apologists. Now you say, how do atheists respond to this? Poorly. Let's go to Richard Dawkins. This is from his book, The God Delusion. Again, the most popular atheist in the world today. Here's what Dawkins says in the center of his book, where he explains what his whole book is about. Here's what he says. He says that the appearance of design is overwhelming in the universe. I've only briefly talked about design. We're going to get more into it next week. But basically here the point is that the universe is incredibly designed. He's already agreeing with us. He says there's no explanation for it in physics. In fact, in a recent debate, Dawkins was asked by a student, Dr. Dawkins, who designed, or where did he put it this way, he said, where did the laws of physics come from? You know what Dawkins said? I have no idea. Why is everything so orderly and precise? Seems like that's a product of a mind. Then he went on to say this. This is his atheistic explanation. Maybe the multi-universe theory, which relies on, what word is that right there, ladies and gentlemen? Luck. Now, is luck a cause? Even if you're Irish, is luck a cause? No, luck is not a cause. Now, Dawkins is trying to say it's just lucky we're here. Well, luck is not a cause. Where do you get luck from? Imagine you're debating Dawkins over the existence of God, and he looks at you and he says, what evidence do you have that God exists? And you look back at him and you say, well, Dr. Dawkins, I don't have any evidence, but I do have luck. What do you think he's going to say? Wow, you really nailed me with that argument. What am I going to do with that? You know what his big argument is? This is it. Who made God? Well, guess what? You know what the answer to that is? Nobody made God. There has to be an uncaused first cause. You can't go back on an infinite regress. There's got to be something that's uncaused and unmade. Now, there's two possibilities. What are the two possibilities? Either the universe is uncaused, in other words, it's eternal, it doesn't need a cause, or something outside the universe is eternal. Well, we've just given evidence that the universe is not eternal, that it had a beginning. Surge, second law, universe expanding, radiation, you know the whole thing, right? So it must be something outside the universe that's uncaused. And that cause is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, intelligent, because it put this universe together with extreme precision, personal, because it decided to go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence. We're getting a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, intelligent, personal being. Just from this argument. Do you see where we're going with this? In fact, the whole who made God argument doesn't get them anywhere anyway. Let me illustrate it this way. Suppose I were to ask you who wrote this book. You would tell me Richard Dawkins. Suppose I looked back at you and I said, that's not good enough. Who made Richard Dawkins? You'd go, well, that doesn't bear on the question at all. Even if I don't know who made Richard Dawkins, I can know that he made this book, right? You don't need to know who made the creator to know who made the universe. The creator made the universe. Whether or not he was created is another question. He wasn't, but it's an irrelevant question to who made the universe. How about this guy, Christopher Hitchens? This is a guy I've debated a couple of times. In fact, that's a picture from our second debate. He's an atheist, one of the new atheists they're called. He's very ornery. In fact, his book is called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. You can sum up his whole book in this sentence like I did during the debate. Here's Christopher's whole argument. There is no God, and I hate him. That's the whole argument right there. Now, he's very smart. But here's what he says in his book. By the way, he has less than 9 pages on metaphysics. What's metaphysics? That's the study of things beyond the physical or the study of being, reality, like God. Less than 9 pages in there on the issues of God and whether or not God exists. He kind of dismisses all the arguments for God. Here's what he does say in those 9 pages, though. He said the Big Bang is the accepted theory of the origin of the universe. He's already agreeing with us. Everything I've said here, all the surge stuff he agrees with. But then he says this in the book. He says the theory works without God, but he never says how. So I asked him in our second debate. We had a time to question one another. So I said, Christopher, the universe exploded into being out of nothing. What is your atheistic explanation? In other words, if there is no God, how do you explain that? And he said, well, the philosopher Laplace had no place in his theory of the universe for God. Now, Laplace was a philosopher who lived about 200 years ago. So I said, I don't care what Laplace said. Laplace was wrong. What does that have to do with anything? What is Laplace? 200 years ago, some guy says that you don't need God. I'm just showing you evidence that appears that you do need God. So what do you do with it? He said, well, I'm not a physicist. Does that mean you can ignore the evidence from physics because you're not a physicist? Suppose you find a body that has bullet holes in it and it's got a note on it, right? You find a body that has bullet holes in it, it's got a note on it. You pick the note off the body and it's in French. And you go, well, I don't speak French. So you can throw the note away, right? No, you got to find somebody who speaks French, right? To figure out how this guy died. You can't just ignore evidence because you're not a physicist or you don't speak French. Find somebody who does. Once again, his other argument, again, is the very lame who made God. And for some reason, I'm not clicking forward there. There you go. All right, let's look at one more possible explanation given to us by a journal known as National Geographic. You ever see National Geographic, those yellow magazines? They look real pretty. They got all the pictures in them. Okay. Here's their explanation for how we got here. This says self-generating universes. Multiple universes grow like branches from a tree trunk in a model that allows the universe to create itself. Can you create yourself? Hello, McFly. Can you create yourself? No, you have to exist prior to creating. Where are they coming up with this stuff? I don't know about you, but I'm not going to let some graphic artist down at National Geographic draw some sort of demented French horn to get me to believe that's how we got here. In fact, one scientist in the article was very honest. He put it this way: it's sort of like we're brushing our ignorance under the rug of the very early universe. Exactly. Now, to sum this all up, we go back to Robert Jastrow. Robert Jastrow, again, the agnostic. He doesn't know if there's a God or not, but he goes through all this surge evidence, and he writes the book, God and the Astronomers, and at the end of the book, this is how he ends the book. This is worth the price of the book. After he goes through all this evidence, here's what he says. And by the way, all this evidence is in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, chapter 3. Here's what he says. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. Now, can anybody in here give me any good reason why we ought not be teaching this surge evidence in our public schools? Did I say anything about the reason we believe in creation is because the Bible says so? No, I do believe the Bible's right about it, but you don't need the Bible to know the Bible's right about it. The evidence we're given here is scientific evidence. I think we ought to let the kids decide. Just give them the evidence and let them decide what to do with it. Look, if you can't teach creation, you can't teach Aristotle. Aristotle believed in an unmoved mover that got motion started. He believed the universe was eternal, but somebody started the motion. In fact, if you can't teach creation, you can't teach the Declaration of Independence. By the way, who wrote the Declaration of Independence? The one that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created. Yes, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, the same man that said taxation without representation is tyranny. What do you think Thomas Jefferson would do today if he were to come back to this country? He'd be very old. But if he were to come back and he were to see that his tax dollars were going to pay public school teachers to teach his kids that his Declaration of Independence was in effect unconstitutional, what do you think he'd do? Yeah. He'd start the Second American Revolution. He'd say, we failed in the first one. What do you mean you can't teach creation? You can't teach anybody, or you can't force anybody to worship the object of creation. All you can do is present somebody the evidence that the Creator exists and let that person decide what they're going to do with it. I think we ought to just teach the evidence and let the chips fall where they may.